Welcome back to What Problem Are You Solving? The greatest innovation podcast you've listened to today. That's right. I'm John. That's Ty. That's Adam. Here we are back for another happy Monday. Let's get right to it, man.
Hey,
This is good. Did
gents.
you have a good weekend?
How, how about you, Adam? How did you have? And I'll talk about my weekend then. The
Thumbs
weekend,
up.
Adam. There.
All right.
So I spent my weekend was interesting because I spent Wednesday through Sunday with my youngest son, who is a member of my fraternity, and so we spent the week Wednesday through Friday. It was interesting because we got up at I think we had to be out of the hotel on Sunday at 11 o'clock. So right around 10:45, we started walking just to see the city. And by the time we finished, I had put in 20,000 steps. My foot was killing me.
I bet.
We walked
Wow.
over that all over Philadelphia. It felt like so. It was a good weekend.
I know
Really
what
was.
problem your feet were feeling, they were trying to solve this week.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Hmm.
But I have a problem that I'm trying to solve,
Let's hear it.
and it's not really a problem. It's more of a test. So I saw it as a problem, and I created a test. So the company I work for, we put out an RFP, and so our job was some of us volunteer raised our hands to read these RFPs, and so we so it was like read the RFPs. Well, I got it last week, and so I was
Request
like, do
for
I really have
proposals.
time? Request for proposal. Thank you for acronym soup, explaining acronym soup. And so my problem was, do I read these, or is there another way to go in, do a first, use some tools that I have? And so I took a test, a flyer, and I created a GPT prompt that took all the information, pulled it together, and I said, please do this and give me a first pass. And so the problem I was trying to solve is, how do you use artificial intelligence to accelerate business processes? But caveat, I had a conversation with a young person that I've known since she was about 2 years old and is now in her mid 30s, who's doing some life stuff. And she's having a quandary about how she can use technology to accelerate, but also how does technology um, intersect with her own personal values, right? So I understand what the Chat GPT and all these other things, the value, and on the other side, what it does to the planet, because it uses up tremendous amount of resources to do all the compute power. And so actually this is part of the conversation that I want to talk about today is like, when do you pivot? And some of the things could initiate a pivot. So that's a little hint into where I'd like to go
Nice.
tonight.
Awesome. Adam, what problem are you solving this week?
Lean startup or not lean startup?
Anything. Pick one.
I know anything. You instead of doing two, I'm starting to give you a choice.
Non-lean startup.
All right. Kind of had a feeling you'd pick that. All right, a fundraiser for the nature center. I got some homework due tomorrow. I like when Ty does they're like personal, but there's like sort of his own accountability stuff that he does. So I got to plan a fundraiser for the nature center. We'll leave it at that. We got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight.
Nice. Well, good luck with that. As for me, one thing that was kind of interesting was the talking lean startup. This week, and then a little bit of last week, in my day job, I'm working on a large scaled agile program, and the program manager wanted to get like product strategy from there's like think of it like a suite of tools. Think like Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint. And he wanted all of the tool owners to kind of come up with a product strategy. And not like Tyra would think like strategy, but just like, what are your goals for next year? What are you going to do in FY26? value do you give to the users this upcoming year? What are you planning on? Very high level. And it was amazing to see how much struggle that was for these product owners, because they never really thought that way before in terms of what business value they're creating. It's, well, we're told to install this product and we're going to install this product and then we're going to upgrade these features. And you're like, no, no, no. But why? Or as Ty and I used to say, to do what? That's the next question. Great, got it. You're plugging this into that. To do what? And so that was a very interesting observation to see not only the struggle, but how we could help them think through these things in a little bit more of a business value. And maybe if you don't even know, then what are those incremental MVPs and experiments you could create to start testing out your value? That got Adam excited.
That's very cool. Go ahead, Adam.
All
What are
right,
you
fine.
thinking?
All right, fine. I'll go. Yeah. So that was the other. Oh no, that wasn't actually the other problem I was solving. But yeah, Ty and I are in the middle of that competition, and same thing happens. Like
You'll break a
asking
record,
them,
man.
asking them what problem are you solving breaks people's brains, and what's your riskiest assumption breaks people's brains, and we'll leave it at that. We're going to talk. It's going to be good. As Ty says that a lot. It's going to be good.
It's going to be good.
Why not? Why not? Yeah, it'll be good. We'll
All
figure
right,
it out.
All right,
let's
Ty.
pivot. Let's
Make it
pivot this.
good.
Let's pivot this conversation.
So,
See what you did there.
what happened? Oh, so in 1978, the singer Kenny Rogers put out a song called "The Gambler," and the refrain for "The Gambler" is, "You got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, know when to run. You got to count your money when you're sitting at the table, 'cause it'll be time enough for counting when the deal is done," right? And it, for me, it really is about, if we take that same song and we look at the startup world is a gamble, right? Because most people will like, I am throwing all in. I'm all in on this idea that I have, and I'm going to invest my life, my blood, my sweat, my tears, my family. Um, Steve Blank talks about when you're out there and you're starting. I mean, I think he went through two marriages, I think, but he talks about it like it is a sacrifice to do that. And so, at what point, and it got me to thinking, like when came up with tonight's topic, this song came to mind. And so the question then becomes, when do you hold them, fold them, walk away, and run? And excuse me, Adam, you know this as much as I do because you actually spend time with Eric. Eric talks about pivot, persevere, kill, right? Which is in some ways exactly what you're trying to figure out. And so I had said earlier about having a conversation with a young person today, just this afternoon, about life space and some of the stuff that was happening in her life. Uh, and it got me to thinking about bifurcations. That is, you're asking the question: is this or is this? So, John, you start talking about this strategy. They could get to a point where they could make this happen, right? Click, click, click. But then there was a place where they got stuck, right? Where they couldn't make a bifurcated choice anymore. And I think my hypothesis is that's where pivots happen, in the liminal space, in the space between left and right, in the space between the binary. It's when you really have to get to, you got to know when to walk away, know when to run, right? That when you've run out a guy that Adam and I been working with. As a matter of fact, I'm working with this guy. Adam introduced, he's actually been on the show. What's Craig's last name? Adam? He's going to kill me, but I forget.
Elias?
Craig Elias was actually, we had Javion Kendrick on, I don't know, for the second time, and we had a whole bunch of people. It was an experiment that we ran, and that was one we actually seems like we're gonna pivot away from, where we had one founder and a whole bunch of people just asking questions But Craig got me to thinking about something around this bifurcated question, and I actually have used it in some very rapid design thinking with some students. And one of the students that I actually did it with is just kicking behind all over the place because he actually got to, in less than a day, a really interesting business idea. But I really do think that there's something in that liminal space, that space between yes and no, left and right, or go no go, that when a founder gets to that space, that's when the pivot could become very powerful because you're like, it's almost not yes or no, but what if or how might we? It's design thinking. And I don't think we've ever really, I think design thinking is, I've seen it lately. Some people are like, yes, it's good to go. Other people said it's past its time. We don't, but I don't know what else there is once you do that. And I'm not smart enough to think, to really understand it. But I really am wondering if the pivot happens when you get to the point where you can't say any longer yes or no. It's no longer this binary choice of yes or no. It's like, ugh. And when you get there, that's actually when you can take the leap. You can actually say, but what if I did this? Is it time to pivot? Because what if I did this is not yes or no, it's what? An experiment. That might be the space where you start to pick up on the experiment. That's where I'd like to start this conversation. See if you all have any thoughts about that.
All right, I think we can knock off number one on the list cleanly then, because I think that's the first time I've ever seen the difference between a pivot and an iteration clearly. I was about to disagree with you, but I think that the binary choices are iterations, changing one little variable. And the pivot, although that was kind of, I agree with you. I think the pivot word was overused for a while, and I'm giving credit. I'm staring at some of the lean startup content on pivots, and we'll go back and we'll link to that in a second. I wanted to, so the reason, if you'll see in the comments, I with all due respect to John, I crossed off number 2 on the list because I think those stories don't serve anyone anymore. Like the way the Kodak story doesn't convince people that, they have to disrupt themselves. A lot of them are cherry picked and, retroactive, blah, 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 blah. Eric says it, what is it? A change in strategy without a change in vision. And like the pure pivot is one variable, your foot on the floor and one thing's changing and not the other.
Like basketball.
Like basketball. Yes. I feel like this is a very good segue, or follow on. It's the opposite of a segue, I guess. From last week, like an adaptation, like we evolve through small changes, not not these pivots. I think the binary stuff is an adaptation week over week, sprint over sprint, assumption over assumption. We are getting an answer, and you're choosing between the next, double down or change something, or pause. Right? I was listening to our friend David Bland again. I think he's going to be on next week. He called it pivot, persevere, or sunset, which I think is much better than pivot, persevere, or kill, or chill. I like
kill
that.
It with fire, burn it with fire.
But yeah, I think I want to get. Yeah, I think it depends on where you are, right? Like, I think this idea of a true pivot came about when you're like a little bit more advanced. You're not at the early stage. You are running out of runway. And we can look at the 8 different types of pivots in a second. I think there's 8, like zoom in, zoom out, business model pivot. We'll look at those in a second. But yeah, let's spend 2 or 3 more minutes on the difference between a pivot, iteration, adaptation, change in strategy. I do think it has become overused. I feel like early stage startups do not pivot. The ones that we're talking about mentoring and coaching, I think that they're just changing either the customer or the problem, right? Like there's nothing else there when you're doing customer discovery, right? So it's either until you have problem customer fit, you're either right about both, wrong about one, wrong about both. You're still changing. I guess you could change both at a time. I guess that's a pivot. I guess if you changed both, well, but that's not really it either. All right, stop me.
So I'm interested in this idea of adaptation versus change, pivot versus iteration. What you didn't say, you said one, but you didn't say the other, revolutionary versus evolutionary, right? And I'm wondering if the iteration, I just want to do the iteration. I iterate on this, I'm here, but I iterate either left or right. Right? It's not a full, not because if I understand the pivot, which is about a point in space, a point in ideas, a point in fundamental um, a movement not away from um my fundamental idea, but it's a way for me to switch how I approach this idea versus just a little bit left, a little bit right, which an iteration could be. And so an adaptation is I uh, an adaptation might be I have a leg shorter than the other, and I adapt to it by having a stronger musculature. Yes, John, exactly. But a change might be I literally take the leg off because it is no longer, and this I know this is kind of extending the metaphor, maybe too much, but I take the leg off and I actually give something a prosthesis, something that actually changes my natural state through adaptation to something that's completely different. So if an iteration is a movement left or right, is the pivot not that I'm not walking, but I'm walking differently. I have a not a fundamental.
The goal is still walking, ambulation.
Yes,
You are just
ambulation.
achieving that differently.
Exactly. Thank you. I think that you articulated that perfectly. And so if my hypothesis, my 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 hypothesis is brain haired as it is, that when you can no longer ask binary and do a binary shift, oh, what did you, oh, they actually, but I know I have a sense that I'm right, but I have to pivot this thing because in the business model campus, you pivot on what customer, or you pivot on price, or you pivot on delivery, or you pivot on partners. I'm still going forward. I still believe that the value that I'm bringing, but I either have to tap into another part where I can no longer satisfy just by tapping in a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
All
I'm
right, so
actually getting to the point where I'm like, oh, I really got to do something different because it's no longer tenable to stay just to do left and right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm gonna disagree. I'm gonna disagree with myself real quick. You just gave me an idea about like what an actual pivot is, because at first I was thinking like what you were just saying had me go to like, oh, that's a leap of, if you're changing both, like you're saying, it's kind of a leap of whatever it calls like a leap of faith assumption, but it's still just an assumption and it is still an iteration. I had said, let's not go back through the same old stories, but I actually would want to go back. Let's go through the same classic stories because I feel like they don't fit the definition. Like a change in strategy without a change in vision. Like, I don't know that that holds. I think it's, because I do agree with you. If the vision stays or the objective stays constant, that's sort of where you get this pivot and you're just changing your strategy, but you're still going to the same place. Your objective remains the same. Whereas with an adaptation, sort of what we were talking about last week, it's more emergent. Like if you're just kind of like going one very like problem customer until I have those locked in. And then I'm adding solution and it's sort of this emergent thing. Like, yes, building a business might be, the objective, or there's no true vision there. I wonder, like, what are the classes? It's Slack, Flickr,
I always use Potbelly restaurants.
Oh, right. I remember. I like that one. We brought that one up on the show. Like, I don't know that any. I think those are just. They're not necessarily a strategy to achieve the same vision. They are. If the vision was like the original product, like those are more opportunistic. I don't know what's the word, like shift. I mean, I don't know. There are pivots in the definition of the word, but in the
Sure.
change of strategy. All right, so let's go through it. What are the top 10? And one of them is certainly Slack, right? It was a video game.
Well,
Or one of them is, all right, so Instagram. Let's go with Instagram.
right. Well, I do remember Flickr, right? Flickr was one that comes off the top of my mind, which is Flickr was a video game
Yes.
first.
Yes.
And it was they found out that the users were using the chat feature to share pictures and photos and were spending more time in the chat than they were actually playing the video game. And they had to make the hard company decision to say, we're going to pick one. We're going to either be a video game company or we're going to be a photo sharing company. And when they made the decision, they told their staff, like, we are 100% cutting over to this new business, and you can either stay and support us in that vision, or you can, we'll give you a nice severance package. So,
And would you
that was a technology pivot based on customer behavior.
say it was more of, it's not a platform pivot. It's not even it's more of just all right. Well, we'll look at the menu in a second and see which kind
So
of.
let me
Get the menu up.
But my main argument is that it would seem to me that the original vision is a video game, right?
Yeah,
right. So,
see, that's what I'm glad you brought that up, because I know, like, the Eric Ries definition, right, is to change a strategy, but keeping the vision. I think you can do vision pivots. That's just my own personal view, because you can, if you use the Potbelly example, right, that they were an antiques company and they sold bread sandwiches on the side, and when they looked at the cash register at the end of the day and found out they sold more sandwiches than antiques, they said, we are in the sandwich business now. That was the sandwiches have nothing to do with antiques, right? That vision is way gone. Right? And so that was a deliberate choice, though. They chose to abandon one vision for profit, and that's perfectly fine. That was the choice they made. It was basically a customer pivot. They went where the demand signal was. So I think that is certainly acceptable as part of the umbrella of pivot types. Ty?
Here's why this song is so important to me. You got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. Know when to walk away. Know when to run. Right. But what is the key to each one of those? You have to know when to do any one of these things. Right. And so just the notion of liminal space, and I'll just read the definition, is a transition area or period existing between two defined states or places. It's often described as an in between or threshold zone. You enter, you exit zone, right? Evoking, check this out, feelings of unease, nostalgia, even eeriness due to its what? Unfamiliarity. And so what I'm suggesting is the power is in the predicate to the actual pivot. How do you know when it's time to pivot? What is it that's causing you to go, oh my God, before you get to, we're broke? That's the power. It's not the pivot itself. It's the thing that happens before the pivot that if we could help people kind of acknowledge, part of it is coaching, right?
Yeah, it's the elephant in the
Helping
room.
them.
It's the maturity. Some people don't ever get it. They'll burn their cash to the ground, because I know this is going to work. If we just had
Exactly
$100 more, we'll make this thing happen. They'll
So
do that at the very end.
how did the Flickr guys, what was it that was happening in the room that made them go, oh, as sugar honey iced tea? We have to do something because there was this thing that was happening. There was this thing that was happening that said, We're about to enter space that we can't say left or right. It is somewhere between we ain't this and there's something else going on. And it, you know, I, the women I was dating, I'd say way back in, 35 years ago, if I ever say let's walk, just trust me, walk. Because my spidey senses would go, especially when I was a police officer, right? My spidey senses would go bing. I wouldn't know what that is. I couldn't tell you what that is, but I knew I was right. Something wasn't right. You know, something was happening. And so, from a startup perspective, how do you help people think about that? I don't know, but you know when to hold them, know when to fold, when to walk away, know when to run.
So I think, are we ready for that part of the comment? Let's go back through some of the real, because I think that knowing when should be the bulk of this conversation, because I do think it depends on what stage you're at, what objective you're at, what traction you have. And so I do think it's more of a strategic question of reacting to an experiment or a sprint and making some of these incremental iterations rather than pivoting. Let's go back to the real world. Let's go to exactly the opposite of what I said I was going to do. Let's go to the real world examples.
Do you want the 10?
Sure.
Zooming in, zooming out, customer segment pivot, customer need pivot, platform pivot, business architecture pivot, value capture pivot, engine of growth pivot, channel pivot, or technology pivot, according to Eric Ries. There may be more, there may be less, but it's a good
Yes, got it. But the power is in
summary.
knowing when to do it,
Yeah,
which is the part that is, I don't, a- absent a coach who
right.
can
Yeah.
get us founder to go, this something's not right. You know something's not right. How do founders tap into that, right? To know when, oh, time to run. Here it is. Here it is. Check this out. Oops, time to run an experiment because
Yeah.
we've reached a zone of
Mm-hmm.
uncertainty. So maybe, Adam, maybe what we're talking about is where's the zone? Because when do you enter the zone? How do you know that you've entered the zone
Well,
that is beyond, I think, what you call
so
iteration?
I think step one to that too, like I said, we all acknowledge we know founders who have just never let go, and they've just driven that one idea into the ground, and you hear stories of it time and time again. I think the step one is the intellectual humility to realize that you don't know everything, and I think what's related to that is the immediate step two, which is uh, scanning. Like come up for air, look around, right, just to make sure, because when you're so hyper focused on something, right, then you're not going to take in additional inputs, whether that's, we would say, data and experimentation, but even just coming up to say something isn't right, or I'm uncomfortable. I think there's something that needs to precede that, right, that allows people to, like they say, just you always check your surroundings. They teach our kids in elementary school: self, others, and surroundings. SOS. Like look out for yourself, look out for others, and look out for what's going on around you. And that's a good acronym that helps to get people to just make sure you come up for air, and you may know what you're doing, but that doesn't mean the environment is right for what you're trying to accomplish.
No, I really thanks for coming in, Brady. Good to see you. So I really like this idea of humility. One, because what you need to do is be able to have the honesty to pull back and say something is outside of my particular awareness right now. I know it. There's some intuition. Um, but intuition don't get paid sometimes, right? But what does get paid is information gets you paid. We talked last week about information entropy. right? When you don't have enough information coming in, that's when your system starts to die, it starts to work, and it just fizzles out. And so um, this idea of scanning, right? Um, Again, being able to know what's up, being able to take advantage of a perspective that allows you to look at data and information that may be new, that may be unfamiliar, may be absolutely familiar, but you can't make sense of it, right? The inability to make sense of what you're seeing and doing is a powerful is a powerful play. I read Isaacson's book Jobs, Walter Isaacson's book about Steve Jobs, and apparently it's been a while since I read it. The boys were it was 10 years ago. But what I do remember is that he had an uncanny ability to kind of sit up and take notice of what was going on around him in a way that was unusual for CEOs. Now, it may have been his, uh, they talked about his autism, that allowed him to kind of pay attention to stuff that was out there, to pay attention to what people weren't paying attention to. But I thank you for this idea of humility and scanning as a part of that precursor to the pivot, any one of those 9 or 10 that have been laid out. I think that's a powerful play. I really do.
You want to see how my brain works?
No, not at all.
You
Please
really
don't
don't.
show
It's
me.
kind of scary.
No.
I'll show you one graphic that shows you the inner workings of John Rourke's
of
brain.
the Ruark.
It's sick and twisted. So what you see here is the line marker of today, and all the black lines to the left are in the past. They are life paths that are closed to you from when you were born and how you got to where you are today. Every decision you've ever made in your entire life has brought you right here, right now, listening to this podcast.
Assuming you have free will.
Well, obviously. So then, I like it. Good philosopher
Which,
question.
well, it came up again from some. There's like the usual suspects that Norm, but
Yeah.
today it came up. Someone who else was talking about it today? Someone
That's so funny.
popped up today. Anyway, go ahead.
I love it. So, but then you can't change the past until you get a DeLorean and go in the past. But until then, you do have control over the decisions that are ahead of you today. So, Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? You've got a multiverse in front of you where you don't know that if I go left or if I go right, how it's going to change my reality. That's okay, right? So, if you have intellectual humility, if you practice the art of scanning, now you can say, I have tons of paths open to me today. Couldn't fix yesterday, but I can do something now to set myself up for a future path. So, then as you do scanning, if you know what your goal is, if you know what your big life goal, you know what your big business goal is, now you should always be scanning and saying, what's the optimal path of decisions that I can make? Now, you can't predict everything, but what I am saying is, hey, I have 3 options on the table. I'm uncomfortable with it, like Ty said. Which of these could I choose, knowing that there's 2 other universes where John picked the other path or paths? You don't know. So you take the data you have, and that if that data is just your gut check, like Ty said, sometimes it's just a gut check, then you have to commit and go down the path. Otherwise, you'll get stuck in analysis paralysis. But once you make that decision, just know that given the data you had, you made the best decision with the options available. That's how my brain works.
So here's, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go, because then I got a whole like monologue coming.
We're
So
talking
here's
predetermination.
uh, what was it? Precogs in from Minority Report. Here, here's the other part. I think the third thing that establishes. And so you've laid out 2 things: the power of the pivot, which is actually the power that leads you to the pivot. That you've talked about humility, you've talked about scanning, but I think the third one is being present. So even that graphic that you had, if you look at the dot, could you pull it back up? On the demarcating line is the past and the future. But if you aren't in the present, you can't even start to consider what where you're at right now. So what you've said is, I can't, if I focused on the past, then I'm stuck where my life path was. If I am so future oriented, I'm trying to scan where I think my life path should be. But what you've indicated there in that center point, right, is that I am present now, which gives me data about how to understand where I was and where I might be going. And so having the humility to know at that point that it is a moment in time, but it's full of information, to know that you can then say, so what is happening in now? I can scan, I can pick my head up and get information, right? Which allows me the opportunity to stay present. So as things emerge, oh, we actually have another point. Could bring it back up again, just one more time, please. Because what do you see to the right of that center point? Additional bifurcations,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
right? So there are additional at every point where there's a bifurcation, there is a liminal space that is new at
Every
every
branch.
point.
Yes.
Exactly.
Every
At
branch.
every branch. At every branch, there's a new opportunity that's present that lets you know.
And what I like about this diagram too is that the branches overlap. And here's why. You could say, I really should have gone and gotten that MBA. Okay. Well, you could start today too. You can start 5 years from now too, right? So you can always come back. Maybe you'll be in a different set of circumstances. You'll have different choices, but there is the possibility to revisit things um, at a future point. Same thing with
What are you
pivots,
thinking,
right? Because
Evan?
it's really not
Yep,
pivot,
exactly.
persevere, and kill. It's really pivot, persevere, and pause, especially with
Ooh,
the way that you can archive things. You can say, I'm not going to delete all this stuff. I'm just going to like put it on pause so that if the market timing changes, I can bring it back with the knowledge that I had and the architecture that I started with.
notwithstanding, David's talking about zombie projects, which I get,
Well, oh
right?
yeah, I'm a fan of zombie projects for sure.
Right. Get him, get him out of here.
Yep.
So where are you at, Adam?
Nabarro's been on pause for 20 years and it keeps inching its way back in. All right, every time we go through a list, time flies, but I married the types of pivots with the examples so we can get those both done at one at a time. But then I still want to spend some time on when to pivot and how do you know. I think the classic example was just you're running out of runway, which I don't think is the right answer. But all right, let's go through these super fast. Um,
And just before you do that, let me say that I'm running out of runway. Right? Is a moment of bifurcation. Either I
yeah,
got money or I don't, but there is some precursor that should have helped you before you got to, or even when you're in the, there's like, what happened? What was that? Because you're so down, you haven't had the humility, the scanning of the presence to pick yourself up and say, "Whoa, I'm sorry." Go ahead.
no, I'm staring at this list. All right, so the zoom in pivot from bourbon to Instagram always drives me crazy when we're teaching this to people because people rightfully call out that they had this thing where they had users, they had a product, they were able to like look at a dashboard and clearly see which feature people were using. And to me, that's not even like that is almost just like obvious. That's just not even good strategy. That is like almost like, what would you call that? That's like,
Well, it's just chasing, yeah, usage, right? That's another thing taught in early agile training was like really only 16% of most software functions get used, right? You don't use every button when you're editing a Word document. You don't use macros every day. So what's the zoom in? Can you focus on the things that are working or that are used the most? The Pareto principle, right?
so zoom in is almost like optimization. It's like an optimization of revenue. It's a know when to hold them. Literally, it's doubling down. I mean, so I agree, again, and we're going to try to go through this pretty quickly, but to me, a zoom in pivot is the cleanest one in theory, but it's the most complicated because it's like, it's not a pivot at all. Yeah. It's a clearly like, if you were betting on something, like bet they, if you know the odds, it's counting cards and knowing the deck, and then like it's a clear double down. So let's see if we get through the list this way, and then if we get off track, zoom out. Well, let's skip. It has Facebook photos. I'm going to zoom. We'll skip that one for a second. I think the most interesting one for this show, what problem are you solving? Customer segment pivot, when the product solves the right problem for different customers. So you're like, what problem are you solving? And you just don't know for who. So I think that most early stage start, this is what I was talking about before, where you know the problem and you're literally doing the literal definition of customer discovery. You're talking to people, you're learning, you're seeing that there's something there, and you're doing a couple iterations of customer discovery, and then you do find the people that have the problem. The other one, the customer need pivot, where you're talking to people over and over again. You have an idea of a problem to be solved, but you're listening to your customer. To me, that's my favorite one, where you're actually listening to the customer and you're pivoting the problem and keeping the customer
Nice.
steady. So in an early stage startup, like the other thing about this list, which we teach, forget about the problem. All these mostly have a solution and a product and a business already in mind. So I like the idea of building this list up from scratch, especially for the selfish purposes of our show. What problem are you solving? If you do this cleanly, which almost no one does, I totally acknowledge. But if you talk just about Ash's leaner canvas and problem person, not always your first user is not always your customer, and we'll talk about that separately, but problem person fit. You either have an idea, you know what the problem, you have a hypothesis of what the problem and the customer simultaneously is. And this is what I was saying, you're either right about both, in which case you double down and you go build a solution. You're right about the customer or the person, but you're right about the problem, which you wouldn't really know about. So you'd start iterating on the customer. How would you know that? Yeah, like how would you know if you're like, no, this person, if you're doing customer discovery and you're observing, I guess then you just have to use intuition. You're sort of holding the problem constant. You're still searching. I guess that's the only way to describe that.
Here's
It's not
here's
really
what's
informed by
interesting about
learning. Go ahead.
what's interesting about customer discovery, I think, with this idea of where I'm coming in, not just the list of pivots, but customer discovery, I think, could give you insight into the I don't know how to solve this, right? Because at some point you could do customer discovery. So, oh, they want this, they want that, they want this, they want that. Becomes those bifurcated questions. But you get to a point where I think that you could get to a point where customer discovery, you're like, I don't have an answer. I think that's when you get the, ooh, do I zoom in? Do I zoom out? Do I do a customer pivot? Do I do a product pivot? Do I do a delivery channel pivot? Do I do a partner pivot? When you get to the point where you don't have what I've been offering up, and I don't know if I'm clear about this, obviously not, but I'm going to try to say it because you've been helpful, is in the discovery process, you can do, Craig Elias would say, is it this or this or this? But when you got to a point where you're like, I don't have anything else to offer. There is no here or here. I might have I might have given myself some data, some information from the customer that the thing that I think that I'm solving for ain't what I'm solving for because there's nothing left. There's no there. I can't go any further. So I might actually one of two things happen. I can't go any further because I've actually solved their problem, or I can't go any further because I can't solve their problem. I can't answer the biggest thing that's bugging them because I can't whatever I'm offering, it isn't an easy yes or no. It's not binary.
Well, that's interesting. When you can't solve their problem, is I would argue is the only time, and it is binary. When it's just like I give up, I can't. I would argue that's the only clear fold'em scenario where where there is a need, there's a business model being made. It's like on a feasibility risk. If you're just like sugar honey iced tea. What's the word for the stronger F word? What's the for anyway? You're just like, oh F, I'm done. Like I give up.
What I'm suggesting is no, you don't give up. That's when you don't give up because now you've reached a in between space, right? So you may want to like kill the idea. It's just complete, like just throw it out because it doesn't make any sense anymore, right? I can't answer it. Or if I have the humility, the ability to scan, and the potential to stay present, I might have by asking a few more questions or doing a little more investigation, thinking a little harder about it. It doesn't end up as one of these kind of binary responses. I now have tripped into something that my original business model can't answer. That's what I'm offering up. You asked me to drive the train tonight, John. I'm driving it, buddy.
You're making my head hurt, man.
I don't know if I'm being clear, except for the fact that, and I'll tell you where this comes from. Uh, this is where, and I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Didn't sleep in a Holiday Inn last night, and I don't play one on TV. But this is where the therapeutic question is. That's where you learn to live in that therapeutic space where you go, all right, you've tried all the answers that you can. What haven't you? What is in between what you thought would be the right and wrong answer? And the only way that you can discover it is to stay present to the question, stay present to the experience.
I think the piece that's I don't say missing here, but I think because this is the segue only because we're running out of time, not because of any other reason. It's like when to pivot is so contextual, or when to do any of the three is like that tree. Like it has to be based on like every like 50 variables. What you know, what you don't know, what three things are locked in, right? Because even just on this example where we're limiting it to the customer segment fit, or what was it? Yeah, like just on a customer segment pivot. Do you really know that, the product solves the right problem, but for a different customer? Well, the right problem, how do you know? Based on your objectives, like what, can you sell? Like, do you give up? When would you pivot? So the pivot there is pretty straightforward. You're pivoting the customer segment. When do you pause is when it's the right problem, the right product, but you can't make any money, so then you have a value capture pivot within a customer segment pivot. When do you know, persevere? Yeah, right problem. You found the customer, then you found the value cap. Yes, I mean, then you're just building. Yeah, then it's like John's brain. But like, when do you stop? So again, going in the customer segment pivot, again, you have the right problem, wrong customer. So now in the literally what we teach, you go out and do 10 interviews, you're wrong, right? So then you have a new hypothesis. It's not really based on learning yet in that case, because you only know what didn't work. There's no clue that's leading you. You might have some anecdotal information in those interviews that leads you to a different, but you don't really. You just have a new set of guesses. So this is what a lot of founders, and I struggled with this with Navarro, where that becomes not rooted in learning, but rooted in like, yeah, I'm stuck on this problem, which you could argue in that case becomes the vision, and the strategy is just different, finding the right customer or user. In that case, you are just pivoting through customer segments until you give up or you find customer problem fit. Is that part clear? Is that what you're doing? Just in that one type of pivot?
So allow me to use another poor metaphor, right? If if we like this diagram so much, the other unspoken word is that when we make a decision, we're trying to optimize our decision making. That's an assumption. Not everybody does, but out of the choices available, we are going to choose one that has the highest probability of success. Basically, when you get to that liminal state, you're just like an LLM, like ChatGPT. It's just going to give you probably the next word is going to be this. So I'm going to present this as the best choice out of your choices based on the data you have right now. And then the next word after that is going to probably be this. So, if you trace one of those green lines, it's going to optimize that route based off of the choices that are available. But it could go back, right? It certainly could branch over to another branch. So that's what I
Well,
think.
here's
It's yeah. That's what in summary I think what that is.
so the human mind can only stay in liminal space for so long,
Yeah,
right? Because the amount of anxiety that of uncertainty will drive you nuts. Particularly a certain engineer that's on this podcast tonight. That uncertainty is nutty making, and I don't blame him. I don't blame
recovering
him. And
engineer.
I'm sorry, recovering engineer who's learning to modify his anxiety around uncertainty by running experiments and getting data and making decisions. But we're not going to go there. But anyway, I poke at you, my friend. I've known you long enough. I can poke at you. But I think that what you're bringing up in terms of if you talk one of the things you talked about, Adam, was burn rate and do I have enough money and what's my runway? That that my sense is that what happens with founders is that they run so hard trying to make sure that they do this that when they get to this like uncertainty. I'm just going to use stop. We'll just replace the uncertain space with the liminal space, like the space between the decision and the next decision. That isn't very clear. Like up is that they try to get out of it as quickly as possible. And I think that if we can as coaches, as people who support startups, we can get them to be still long enough to sit with the uncertainty, to gather enough information so when they need to leave that next space, that they're made a strong, informed, hypothesis-driven, experimented hypothesis. Foundational hypothesis that's been experimented has enough data that when they get to the next space, it's like, oh, it's very clear, left, right, until they get to the next one, like, now what do we do? And then they run really, really fast to solve the problem because they feel like the anxiety of what's going to happen. I am so concerned. There's a buddy of mine who built a business that will probably go IPO in the next year. Right, just a brilliant cat, brilliant. Built his company in 3 years. He's not on the board anymore. What? He doesn't own it anymore because he spent so much time running, trying to make sure he doesn't live in the uncertain space, the left and right, making the decisions that now it's like, hey, you don't even own the company anymore, or at least you aren't the CEO anymore. And we know term sheets work. right?
Right.
I don't know. That's where
So
this fits for me.
so how do we bring this all together? Right. We're at time. What's the summary? What's the conclusion? How do we put a bow on this and give some value to the people listening?
Part two.
Stay tuned for next week.
I think so. This is going to sound just cheesy and cheap, but I've been tracking what Brady's been saying, right? Uh, Brady, who's somebody that you and I know from back in our days, he said, um, "Are we describing a three by three matrix of pivot types?" Maybe. He then went on to say, what is the next thing? Changing your value proposition, give you eight focus areas around you. I don't know, right? And we know the business. I think you just go talk about the
In the
business model
business
canvases
model
and everything.
canvas, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'll end with this as we wrap this up. For me, there is a philosophy around and a humanity around this. When Adam and I were out in Dallas, we had an opportunity to hear a gentleman from South Africa who's talked about um, running a business was a very spiritual thing, which is an amazing way that he talked about it. Um, but it was a very spiritual opportunity, and maybe the pivot, the power of the pivot is being able to be still and listen very hard to things that aren't just always there. That's my end.
I like it. You've given me some food for thought, so I appreciate that. Adam, anything to add?
I'm reluctant to add. I think that's a good place, and I will pivot my answer. I won't say nothing, and just, but I will just kind of add to that specifically that like it's. I've always looked at this as a locked into the pivot in strategy without a change in vision. But to me, it's more like now I'm thinking like more like Ty said. It's where does the pivot come from and where is it going? And like how do you get there? Are you just trying random stuff? Are you evolving? Like evolution is accidental mutations that then end up working versus we talked about that last week where it's intentional versus emergent. Um, yeah, like you could just go through like now with AI, like you could say, build me a business and it'll just try all the different combinations. I always looked at, like when you're breaking into in the movies where you're breaking in, you're cracking the code. It's like each line of code is isolated until it's locked in. And then you could break a 20 part save. Um, yeah, I feel like you could just say a pivot is any change in any one of the business model canvas boxes one at a time. Like you could make it that simple, but I don't think it is that simple. So
There you
yeah,
go. All right, thanks.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think everything you guys said is great. I really appreciate you, Ty, pulling the variable of the human psychology and human behavior in along with this. We talk about experiments and experimentation and why you need a good coach to help you through that. But I think in summary, there's a spectrum of those. And I think we covered most of them, right? Where there's the diehard founder that's going to stick to the one path and run right into the brick wall. There's others that could be frozen, right? Because it's a fight or flight response, and I don't know what to do. And then doing nothing is not really an option because you're gonna run out of runway doing nothing. But that certainly happens. Uh, I used to work with a guy who was I called him behind his back a Roomba robot because his strategy was just trying something and then when it didn't work, just run into the next wall and with no intelligence whatsoever. That is certainly a way to run experiments, but that neglects that scanning mode, right? It was just, nope, that didn't work, that didn't work, that didn't work until finally, after on his like 10th try, maybe he had some sort of customer traction. But certainly I wouldn't recommend that either. So there's a spectrum of how do we put the human into these pivot choices so that we make better choices, not just for the business, but for the human as well.
So just one last, you this rumba robot left right bump bump bump. That's that bifurcated, right?
Yeah,
But why? What happens before and where do you go in before you hit
right,
the next wall, the next wall? Can you be intentional
right.
about what happens in between? And then I'll say this and then I'll stop. That means that you have to bring the left and the right brain.
Beautiful. Thanks for that. See y'all next week. Take
All
care.
right.